Well, I have two questions to that, and maybe if we'll just step over the corpse of all of this mathematics and the proof that people are not accepting, let's just take it as a given, because that could probably be several conversations in and of itself. How do we necessarily get reincarnation from the quantum mind model? And my second question is, what is it exactly that's reincarnating? Is it the gestalt of the individual? Are we talking fragments, memories, perceptions, intuitions? Is it a whole discrete entity that's just, pardon my very silly example, just like beaming out of one body in its pure form and then beaming into another body? What is it exactly that's reincarnating?
Well, it is quantum, so it can't really be broken down into different parts in any meaningful way. For example, if I wanted to divide your personality in two, that doesn't make any sense. I can't get half a Josh. I can either get 100% Josh, I can get watered down Josh if I give him a bunch of vodka, but I cannot cut him up in any meaningful way. And I think it's pretty easy to assert that the totality of your mind as it exists right now does not reincarnate, because if it did, you'd remember, right? There wouldn't even be a debate because it would be so obvious. And I think we can answer the question as to why that doesn't happen with a simple evolutionary strategy argument, because I think for most people, if you did remember all your past lives, and if you remember one, then you're going to remember them all, it would be overwhelming to the subjective consciousness. So the thing to understand about human consciousness is that it's a biological machine. Its primary imperative is survival. It's not the acquisition of objective truth. And sure, lots of humans can achieve realization of deeper truth, and that's a very commendable path to undertake, but it's not the default position. Most people have to struggle tremendously to get to the point where they can have more or less objective stance on their consciousness. So the way I look at it is, it's a little bit difficult to understand, because when people think of quantum systems, that they've seen basically what are called slit experiments. This idea that if you have an electron emitter and it lets off an electron and you have a screen over here, if there's no slit, all the electrons will register at the same place. And that's predicted by the geodesic between the emitter and the screen, i.e. the shortest distance, which would give us the unfettered maximum entropy state, which is the electron registers at the geodesic or closest point to the emitter on the screen. But then if you introduce a slit, excuse me, basically an opening of a sufficiently small size, that distorts the electron's potential field in such a way as to generate a diffraction pattern. So this is basically how people understand quantum mechanics. And the conclusion to draw from that experiment is that basically the electron's position was in some way determined by the position of the slit, because without the slit, you just get everything at the same place. And with the slit, you get a diffraction pattern, which people can look up. Single slit or double slit diffraction, it doesn't really matter. I prefer to use single slit because it's simpler and it's possible to explain everything, but for some reason, everything on the internet is double slit. But when you look at the mind, it's more complicated to try to understand. So at some stage, you just kind of have to accept that the mind is a quantum computer. It's a three-dimensional hologram projected by your body. And it obeys the laws of quantum mechanics. So the way I explain reincarnation is that your mind is the origin of your thoughts, but it's also that which experiences your thoughts. And those two things are not the same. So there's thoughts coming from somewhere, and then there's something else that is realizing the thought. Does that kind of make sense? So because the quantum mind has the capacity to interfere with itself when you die, your mind will continue to interfere with itself, i.e., you will be able to think until there's basically no more thoughts left. But there's still some residual potential, and that's the thing that observes the thoughts, doesn't decay. So basically, the way to understand reincarnation is that all quantum systems, in order to undergo state reduction, so quantum systems are systems that are in potential and exist at various energetic levels. So it's possible to have, it's not just a 2-state thing, like it could be 1,000,000 states or 1,000 states, but they're hierarchical energetic states. So when you die, you have a relatively high energy state because you're alive. You have a biological projector, which is generating this quantum mind. And then when the body goes away, you don't have an input of energy anymore, which leads a lot of people to think, well, everything just dies then. But that's actually false, because the body is that which the mind interferes with. So if the body's no longer alive to coherently interfere with the mind, that's a potential that exists in the mind that that particular body is no longer able to reduce. And one of the laws of quantum mechanics, people can look this up in the Copenhagen interpretation, is that it's not possible to reduce the energetic potential, aka reduce a quantum system to one of its eigenstates, without a measurement device. And that is basically the proof of reincarnation. And if as long as you accept that the only thing that human consciousness can meaningfully interfere with is a living body, and I think it's pretty easy to assert that, because I don't really think people's consciousness interferes with rocks or chairs or anything like that in any meaningful
Pizza pies, right?
Yeah, it's not like I can sense, that someone's eating a pizza pie next door, which is what would be required for the mind to interfere with non-living objects. And basically this disembodied consciousness floats around until it encounters a body that is sufficiently coherent as to undergo state reduction. And that's where the event of reincarnation takes place. And I went into some detail just looking at how the fetus evolves in the womb. And as it turns out, it starts to have a heartbeat around the 5-week mark. So I'm postulating that that is when reincarnation happens, because you could think of that initial heart pump as this quantum mind floating around and then delivering some of its energy to the body in the form of a heartbeat. And then the heart becomes electrically charged and spontaneously starts to pump on its own, which then regenerates the conscious field. So they work kind of in tandem to generate this newborn. And that's basically the proof, which I know someone in the chat's already called it pseudoscience. So I understand I'm facing an uphill battle here, but I think it's worth it, because for the people that do understand, I think it's going to bring them a lot of peace and happiness. So the barrage of trolls, I see you guys there. It's just, what do you call it? An occupational hazard, but it's worth it in the long run.